Let's first of all talk about and explore a little bit of what Animate CSS before we dive in and start using it. Animate CSS is a code library. So you may be asking, if you're new to code libraries, what is a code library? Well, code library, depending on the environment, code libraries may be source code or intermediate language that basically has on some default functionality, some default styling, anything like that, that once you attach to your project, you now can take advantage of what that code library has to offer. So if that code library basically has already stylized some buttons, and then you go into your code, your HTML, and then all you have to do is apply a class, or you can apply some additional data. Now all of a sudden you don't even have to go into the CSS file. Your object now works. And so the code library allows you to go in and customize and add on additional functionality without you having to code everything from scratch. And really, Animate CSS you can do in 3 different steps. It really is that easy to be able to do. We're going to go further in detail with it, but the 3 main steps of working with Animate CSS is 1, attaching the code to any HTML file and making sure that code library is attached to your file. The second one is apply a class to an object within the HTML. So if you want to animate a picture, you want it to fade in, then you apply that class to that picture. And then lastly, you just go in and you preview the animation. And it's really that easy, just going through those 3 different steps of attaching the code, applying the class to the object, and previewing the animation. So a class, if you're not familiar with what a class is, in HTML, you can add on an attribute called class equals, and then in quotes, you give it the class name. So in our case, with Animate CSS, we're going to attach the class name that will then animate our object in a certain way. So class selectors, if you're not familiar with class selectors themselves will allow you to specify and talk to an object on the stage. So as soon as I give an object on the stage, like a paragraph or something like that, a class name, I'm then able to, in the CSS file, talk to that object and then stylize that object in a different way, or in this case, animate that object. So CSS animations allow me to animate in CSS, but I can't really animate, or I don't see that animation until I've applied that class from that animation to that object. So to select elements in CSS, you need to have a period before that class name. And so this comes in handy, especially when we get into like jQuery and we're selecting a class. We need to have that period before the class name as well. You don't need to have that in the HTML file. You just need to have that in the CSS and in the JavaScript if you're using jQuery to be able to talk to that class. So in CSS, if you're referencing a class in CSS, you do have to have the dot and then the class name, and then within the curly brackets, you basically have your property and your values for your CSS. All right, so I have open Animate CSS. I can come in here and I could take a look at some of the animations. If I come in and select this drop-down box, I can then go in and select an animation, and you'll see that the title up here will animate. So if I wanted to animate again, I can just click on that button for animates. So we're going to talk about this a lot. We're also going to talk about the documentation that you can see on GitHub, how to download Animate CSS from GitHub or from this link right here. We'll talk about how to attach it to our project and everything you need to know to get started with Animate CSS.